Ladies and gentlemen, it seems ZANU-PF has been revisited by a ghost from the past. You see, when Robert Mugabe was still president, everyone in ZANU-PF used to say Mazda. Mugabe achatonga zvake dakara afa. Translated, Mugabe will be in power until death because they said he was quote-unquote irreplaceable. Some even said, even if he died, his corpse would rule Zimbabwe from the grave. Well, maybe they were onto something. Maybe Mugabe is this ghost which I'm saying has revisited ZANU-PF. But then again, is this ghost revisiting? Did it ever leave? And if it did, which pastor exorcised it? Mazda. Mugabe achatonga zvake dakara afa because he is irreplaceable, was irreplaceable. Well, history has a tendency of repeating itself because we are seeing the same madness again in ZANU-PF. There are some in ZANU-PF who are just now calling for President Emmerson Mnangagwa to remain in office indefinitely because they are saying he is quote-unquote irreplaceable. Does it ring a bell? When did ED become irreplaceable? I mean, he even calls himself a leader after the order of Munu Mutapa. Doesn't that make him a king? And if he is a king, why do we vote then? Kings are not voted for. Shouldn't we just forget about elections? Well, fellow Sadzaitas, slay queens and bingers, socialites, papalites, vasinamalites, varikudya rice, nevasinama rights. Welcome to the special report. Now, let me begin by reading this article from the Herald. It goes, there is a growing chorus across the country among ZANU-PF structures and affiliates for President Mnangagwa to continue at the helm as his unparalleled achievements building towards Vision 2030 can only be attained if he remains in office beyond 2028. All the country's provinces have been roundly endorsing President Mnangagwa with the slogan 2030 Vanenge Vachipo, refusing to die, despite the president's indication that he will not continue beyond 2028 in abidance with the country's constitution. How convenient. ED, the unassuming victim of the people's support. He wants to step down, but the people want him to stay on. So you will probably have no choice but to stay on because he's a listening president. He's a man of the people. After all, the voice of the people is the voice of God. So by staying on, you will actually be listening to God. How convenient. It's a script from the playbook of all long-time rulers. They are always victims of the people's support. How convenient. When will ZANU-PF ever learn from mistakes of the past? We are just coming out of 4 decades of a one-man show. A man who overstayed in power to the point of getting removed by his own military. The same military which kept him in power for those 40 years. ZANU-PF needed the military to stage a coup in order for the Central Committee to fire Robert Mugabe and promote ED to Zimbabwe's #1 job. Why on earth are they just now trying to create another Mugabe by calling for ED to stay on? And if ED is truly not interested in running again, why is he silent on all these people who are campaigning for him to stay on? Because one word, just one word from ED will stop all this madness. So it's either he's enjoying the madness because it benefits him, or the madness is actually choreographed by none other than himself. Well, today I'm going to show you with historical evidence that all this madness is choreographed. It's all planned. All these people that you see moving around the country calling for ED to stay on as president, it's all planned. It's a sitcom, a soapy, a drama, a Netflix series, well, Zimflix series, Zanuflix a series. ZANU-PF structures don't make decisions. Decisions are made for them. They are simply told what to do and they do it. Consider this. Days before the coup, all the ZANU-PF provinces had unanimously endorsed Grace Mugabe to become vice president. The same structures also unanimously fired and expelled Emmerson Mnangagwa from ZANU-PF. Guess what? 11 days later, the same structures expelled Grace Mugabe from the party. The same Grace Mugabe who they had endorsed to become a vice president, they expelled her 11 days later. The same structures also readmitted ED into the party and promoted him to the position of president. The same ED who they had expelled from the party. These are the structures which the Herald is telling you have endorsed President ED to stay on as president. Like I said, it's a Netflix series, Zimflix, Zanuflix. Presidents in ZANU-PF are not chosen by the structures. The ZANU-PF structures are just there to legitimize what has already been decided and established by the establishment. The only ZANU president who was truly and freely elected by the people without the influence of the military establishment was this man that you're looking at right now, Ndabaningi Stole, the founding president of ZANU, elected in 1964 at ZANU's first Congress held in Gweru. This is the Congress which conceptualized the creation of a military wing, and this military wing was called ZANLA, the ZANU Army. It was later established and operationalized by Herbert Chitepo and this guy, Noel Mukono, the godfather of the ZANU Army, ZANLA. He was the first leader of the ZANU Army, but he was not a soldier. He was a civilian, a journalist by profession. He is grossly underrated and underreported. You see, throughout the 60s, Mukono was the one in charge of the ZANU Army, reporting to Chitepo through the Revolutionary Council and later the Darere Chimurenga. The Darere Chimurenga, which when translated means War Council, was responsible for formulating a strategy. These strategies would be actioned by a military structure called the High Command, led by Noel Mukono, who also sat in the Darere Chimurenga as the Secretary for Defense. The founding ethos of the ZANU Army was that the politics would always lead the gun. However, as the army grew in size and strength, the founding ethos lost its meaning. The first time it became very clear that the military was becoming too influential in the party was in 1973 at the ZANU conference, which was held in Zambia in a town called Kafue. At this conference, all the top positions in the Darere Chimurenga were up for grabs. The hotly contested position was that of Secretary for Defense, because occupying this position automatically made you a chairman of the High Command. And being chairman of the High Command meant that you were the operational leader of the army. So that would mean that, number one, you are the leader of the army. Number two, you have direct legal political influence within the party. So, in the end, Josiah Magama Tongogara won it amid allegations of rigging, commandeering, and intimidation. Of course, Tongogara denied the allegations. Keep in mind that in terms of the voters, the biggest constituents of voters in these elections were actually the soldiers. Can't have been very hard for Tongogara to convince the soldiers to vote for him, whether by hook or crook. When your commander tells you to jump, the only question you ask, if you must, is how high, sir? Soldiers should have never been incorporated into the ZANU structures. This was a recipe for the disaster that befell Zimbabwe post-independence. So, there you have it. Tongogara, a military man, joined the political structures of ZANU in 1973. That means Tongogara legally became a politician in 1973. That means soldiers were legally invited to participate in ZANU-PF politics in 1973. For the first time, the military had political influence in ZANU-PF from 1973. The politics was no longer leading the gun, and so began the Game of Thrones. Since 1973, the army has always been at the center of every leadership change in ZANU at a presidential level. The first leadership change happened in 1975 when the military disowned Ndabaningi Stole and expressly recommended Robert Mugabe to take over. 2 years later, at the Chimoio Congress in 1977, Robert Mugabe was officially elected a president. It was a foregone conclusion. The military had already chosen him 2 years earlier. So, Robert Mugabe was elected in 1977 and he would go on to lead ZANU until 2017. That's 40 years, ladies and gentlemen. And in those 40 years, he had the full confidence of the military establishment. The second leadership change in ZANU-PF again happened at the instigation of the military in 2017 during the so-called Operation Restore Legacy, the Note coup, which gave us the current president, Emmerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa. So, there you have it. In case you might have been wondering, why can't the military just be professional and leave politics to politicians? Well, it's because the military has always been involved in Zimbabwean politics since 1973. And why was Robert Mugabe removed? Mugabe was removed because he was aligning himself with the ZANU-PF faction, which was at loggerheads with the military establishment. I mean, he should have known better. They put him there in 1977. They protected, defended, and sustained him for 40 years. They literally owned him. He just didn't see it that way, and quite frankly, to his own detriment. Maybe let me remind you of General Chiwenga's words in 2017, days before the coup. He said, "The Zimbabwe Defense Forces remain the major stockholder in respect to the gains of the liberation struggle, and when these are threatened, we are obliged to step in." Let me unpack those words. What the general is telling you is that you are free to practice your politics. By all means, do your politics. You are free to do that. But, and this is a very big but, if your politics gets in the way of our interests, we won't hesitate to step in. He wasn't bluffing, you know, because the military did indeed step in and did a not a coup. They redefined the meaning of the word coup d'etat. The first coup in history to get local, regional, and international legitimacy. That takes a lot of technical, tactical, and strategic planning. Chiwenga wasn't bluffing. The military is indeed a major stockholder in Zimbabwean politics. This has been true since 1973. That explains why it's very difficult for the opposition to win elections in Zimbabwe. It's because the military establishment won't allow it. But it almost happened, in 2008 when Tsvangirai beat Mugabe. The Zimbabwe Electoral Commission took almost 2 months to release results. 2 months, ladies and gentlemen. That tells you how badly Robert Mugabe had performed in that election. And in the runoff election that followed, the military establishment took over the ZANU-PF campaign. What followed was the kind of stuff you only see in horror movies. A bloodbath. The long sleeve, short sleeve, barbaric choppings, which I sometimes like to call the Zimbabwean version of Hitler's concentration camps. Tsvangirai ended up running away from Zimbabwe, but the election wasn't stopped. Mugabe continued on a one-man race. He won the election by over 90%. That is precisely what Chiwenga meant when he said, "We won't hesitate to step in when our interests are threatened." The army generals have never hidden the fact that they belong to ZANU-PF. Only recently, the current commander of the Zimbabwe National Army, Lieutenant General Sanyatwe, said that ZANU-PF will rule Zimbabwe until the donkeys grow horns. Kusika madongi amera nyanga. And he said they will achieve this through quote-unquote command voting. And command voting simply means whether you like us or you don't like us, we will make sure you vote for us. And they have the guts to say this publicly because they know we will do absolutely nothing about it. These are the people who determine who becomes president of ZANU and effectively president of Zimbabwe. And if these people don't want ED to go for a third term, then it doesn't matter what ED does. It won't work. And if they really want ED to carry on beyond 2028, then consider it done. Did I hear you saying Section 91 of the Constitution doesn't allow it? Well, my guy, my sister, my brother, my fellow Sadza Eater, no constitutional clause formed against the military establishment shall prosper. Don't you know that it's illegal for the army to deploy itself? Didn't the army deploy itself to carry out Operation Restore Legacy? Did they not get Justice Chiweshe to legalize that illegality after the coup? Why is Chief Justice Malaba still in office? Why did Job Scala spend 2 years in remand prison without a single conviction? Why is Jameson Timber and 70 other political activists in jail despite not having committed any crime? Why was Mazibabawe Shanduko tortured? Why was Jacob Ngarivume imprisoned for over a year using a law that doesn't exist? No constitutional clause formed against the establishment shall prosper. Let me remind you of Walshman Ncube's words. You see, in an interview with Trevor Ncube, Walshman Ncube said that during the 2017 coup, the MDC held a meeting at Morgan Tsvangirai's house. They were planning to do a press conference afterwards. Then, they received a call from the military. They were warned that if for whatever reason they condemned the coup, then there would be gnashing of teeth. Don't condemn what we are doing, said the army. That explains why the opposition never at any time condemned, attacked, or criticized the army during the coup. If anything, they supported and gave it the much needed legitimacy that it was seeking by involving the people in that march on State House. Notice, in 2017, they needed people to march because the people are the fountain of legitimacy. Why do they need legitimacy? They need legitimacy in order to sanitize their actions. By asking you to march in 2017, the military was telling you that collectively as a people, you have the power to effect political change in Zimbabwe. Just think about it. They had guns, tankers, and thousands of soldiers. They carried out a coup and pulled it off, yet they asked you to march. Why? Why did they ask you to march? There was no need. You didn't need to march. The coup was done. It was finished. Finito. They pulled it off. Why did they ask you to march? They asked you to march because they know that you carry a certain power that their guns can't give them. It's called a people power, the father of legitimacy. Remember, they wanted that legitimacy. And this people power is the ingredient necessary for a successful revolution. And a revolution is the only thing that can realistically stop the military establishment. Not elections. Elections won't do it. They control the elections. You think they're going to let you win? Of course not. It took me a very, very long time to accept this sad reality. But you know what else is said? We as Zimbabweans are at least a generation away from carrying out a revolution on our own. We are too polarized, too divided, and too weak to start a revolution. Either you do a revolution or you sit down with the military establishment and somehow map the way forward. Find out what are their grievances and what assurances can the opposition give them, if any, because you can't wish the military establishment away. Maybe let's learn from the past, because whatever grievances they have can't be too different from the grievances Peter Walls and his military establishment had throughout the negotiations that took place during the liberation struggle. But until such a time yatengetani mabolzobo snooker like the Kenyans, we will continue participating in shambolic elections and crying foul afterwards. A vicious cycle of disputed elections. But whenever I lose hope, I am comforted by the words of the late great Father Zimbabwe, Joshua Mqabuko Kanyongolonkomo. He said, Zimbabwe will not die. Its young people will save it. How I long for that day to come as soon as yesterday. But until that day comes, I'll be here to marinate you with all the details without fear or favor, because on this platform, we say it as it is. And as always, thank you so much for watching. And if you enjoy the content, please like and share.
Vanonditevera totanga ndaferefeta ndozozvinyora papepa.